I'm with John Genga, and John actually represented Michael Jackson specifically in the Martin Bashir case, but for many other things as well. How are you doing today, John?
Good morning, Eric. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, thank you. Now,
How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Now, how did you meet Michael Jackson, and in what way did you represent him?
Well, I represented him in a lawsuit that he filed in the UK regarding the documentary called "Living with Michael Jackson" that Bashir filmed. We found out about it.
Martin Bashir?
Yeah, the Martin Bashir documentary.
Okay.
Yeah, so we found out about it shortly before it was to be released. And I got a call from a partner of mine in my firm who was connected to the fellow who was sort of putting together the team to deal with the whole documentary. And we were going to be the legal team. There's also a PR team and others that were dealing with it. But I was the head of the legal team in terms of coming up with a strategy. And actually, the strategy ended up being that we filed what ended up being a copyright infringement lawsuit in the UK to try to stop the show from airing. It actually aired before we could do that, but we were able to stop further exploitation of the show.
Well, no, hold on. Just to clarify, when you said stop the further exploitation of the show, does that mean that the show was taken off the air? How did that come about?
Yeah, so there was an agreement not to further distribute the show in terms of actually showing it anymore. So, and that became a court order, and that was really most of the case. The rest of the case was, was damages, but the main part of the case that we were successful in was stopping the further distribution of the show.
And what was the issue with the documentary?
But my issue as the lawyer is what's the most effective way to get control over this from a legal perspective. And as it turned out, we had a strong argument that we actually owned the copyright. Michael's company, MJJ Productions, owned the copyright in all of the footage that Bashir took because of, and I'll tell you how this happens. So Michael is a very private guy, and he was protected by a lot of people, as you probably can imagine. And I can tell you this from firsthand because I've been on the ranch. And before you could go on the ranch, you had to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. And the NDA also provided that you couldn't film, you couldn't do anything, and if you did, that MJJ Productions would own everything you did. Oh. So and Bashir signed that. I gathered all the information that was surrounding this whole thing, and there's literally this little tiny piece of paper that I said, "Oh, hang on a second, we might own this show."
So, okay, that's fascinating, and now I can already hear the pushback of, okay, but that's not saying that any of the claims in the documentary were good or bad or otherwise. Is that often the case to where even though you want to go after the content, you're just trying to get it down whatever way possible, then you can quibble over the content?
Yeah, right. My job as the lawyer was to, try to come up with the most effective strategy to get the best relief I could from a legal perspective. We weren't arguing over the content, the validity of the content, the truth of the content, although I certainly, the content is what it is. The conclusions that one might draw from the content obviously differ. There was obviously an angle and an accusation that was being made by Bashir that obviously our camp disagreed with. And that was obviously the motivating factor, or a motivating factor, to get control over this thing.
Question on that. Now, a lot of the charges against Michael Jackson, I mean, there's a lot of implication. There's a lot of things out there in the air. I personally am not that invested and have not really researched a lot, but I've just kind of gone, well, the general consensus, whatever. I know that that's a terrible, risky thing to do, and documentaries are very, very dangerous. But do you find or have people push back saying, hey, having an NDA and signing away all the rights and hiding the footage, does that make him look guiltier to some people, or do people use that as leverage against him?
People who have strong opinions are going to say what they're going to tailor the narrative to their view, right? So I suppose you could make that argument. We didn't come across that in the course of our work. Generally, the law, the information in the media about the lawsuit was pretty factual, and I didn't, at least in the coverage that I saw, I didn't see any implication or accusation that the lawsuit was further attempt to, quote unquote, cover up all this bad stuff about Michael, or any suggestion that that all this secrecy and NDAs and ownership of copyright was in any way an implication of guilt on his part. I never saw anything that went that far at all. Okay. If anything, we got, I thought, favorable coverage for the legal work, in that we were able to accomplish what we set out to accomplish.
Oh yeah, I mean, you definitely, if you won, you prevailed, and that's the bottom line in the end. Now, you originally reached out to me to kind of discuss Michael Jackson, and I think you were saying there's kind of a parallel, in your opinion, to Johnny Depp and what Johnny Depp has gone through. Can we talk about that?
So obviously, and you've noticed this probably in the course of your work, in doing these things, that there's been a growing interest, or there was a great interest, obviously, in the Depp trial. It was a fascinating thing. I looked at it from the perspective of this was a great opportunity for a lot of people to learn and understand more about the legal system. But of course, there's the element that, and the reason that Mr. Depp brought the case, which was, to vindicate himself. And as he said in one of his, I think, when he was first put on the stand, his lawyer said, why are you here? And he said, because, you can go in 0.6 seconds. I think he said you could go from being Cinderella to being Quasimodo. You can be at the top of your game. You could be at the top of the world. You could be a big star. And then one person makes an accusation, and all of a sudden, the world shuts down on you. And that's kind of what we were worried about, what happened with Michael. And he didn't have the advantage back in 2003, when this all was happening, of, this, or the disadvantage, by the way, of all the social media. That just didn't exist back then. So we had to come up with other things. Like I said, I handled the legal strategy, but we had a PR strategy. Part of the PR strategy involved doing a responsive documentary that we were able to get on the air on Fox, actually, within a couple of weeks after the Bashir documentary. That painted him in a light that we felt was more his truth. And the whole basis upon which Michael did this documentary, by the way, is he felt that he trusted Mr. Bashir, and that he was going to portray him. There's no agreement to portray him, quote unquote, positively, but to portray him in a truthful way, in that Michael could say, yeah, this is really me. And he never got the chance to do that. We never got a chance to review the footage before, or the final product before it came out. He never got that chance. That was one of the arguments that we made, was that he was supposed to have had that opportunity. And Michael never had the opportunity before he died to do what Johnny Depp did, which was bring a lawsuit and vindicate himself.
You brought up a couple of good points, and I think it's interesting when you said, you didn't know if you would recommend that Michael Jackson even did sue for defamation or anything, because he was working it through. I would argue, and I have argued since before the lawsuit even came out, that Johnny Depp literally had no choice but to file a defamation, because everything had been taken from him.
I don't know what he could have done other than that. I mean, we certainly were able to come up with some things with Michael. But you're right. He felt he had no choice. And on, when I first heard about the case, I thought, what the hell is this guy doing? I mean, it's all this. This can't help him. All this dirty laundry is going to get dragged through the press, and that would have been, that might have been one of the reasons I might not have, suggested that strategy if I had been asked, and I never was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, at some point, you're the king of pop, and people are going to forget this, or you're going to go and do what you do and wow people with that, and that's what you do, So, but in Depp's case, and when it first came out, like I said, I'm like, boy, and all this terrible, all these texts he wrote, and all these things that came out, and I'm thinking, he doesn't have a chance in this case. And then, Amber Heard took the stand, and I don't think any juror, and if I had been a juror, I didn't believe word one out of her mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, she snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. I really,
she did.
Almost all, or the majority of my friends in LawTube, all were saying, no, there really is no defamation. All she has to prove is one incident.
Yes.
Verbal abuse. His own witness even said verbal abuse. So there was such a huge mountain to climb, and she managed to do it in direct, not even cross. Even her direct was not helpful.
Yeah, I don't think she. Well, first of all, I'm not so sure how good her lawyers were. I think they were. I don't really have an opinion about how good they were. She seemed not to listen to her lawyers. And if there's anything that's frustrating for a lawyer, is a client who thinks they're smarter than their lawyer. Not in terms of just in general, but like they know what they're doing more than their lawyer knows what they're doing when their lawyer does this for a living, right? And I'm sure they, counseled her on a number of things, including not looking at the jury every damn time you answer a question. I mean, that looks so fake.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of issues. The way her case was run, again, because she did the countersuit, I think that threw everything out.
Yes, yeah, and I think she put a lot more credit on the UK case as well, because the standard there was much different. I mean, Johnny Depp wasn't a party in that case; it was the publication that was being sued, and the publication, it basically had enough information, whether completely verified or not, or whether, they got anything under oath from Mr. Depp himself. I mean, there's a lot of protection afforded to the publication.
Right. They only had to prove that they had a reason to believe that it was accurate.
There was a lot of evidence that she could have relied on in the U.S. trial, that at least could have allowed a jury to find in her favor because of all the stuff that was going on between them. You could have made that inference, but when you heard her on the stand and with all the inconsistencies and things, it became, you just didn't want to believe her.
Right. Well, if you don't believe this, you don't believe it. Gets to the point. I don't believe a single thing that woman ever said, period. And the jury shuts down, I think. And
right. And we have lawyers love to talk about this, because there's a jury instruction that says, if you find that a witness has been willfully false in a certain part of his or her testimony, you're entitled to disregard all of their testimony.
But okay, so back to Michael. You have spent time with him. Obviously, I'm guessing not only in the boardroom, but also on his ranch, etc. What can you tell us about him? He's a mysterious person. It's a black box to, most of us.
Yeah, no, he's a different guy. He's an artist, right? And so he doesn't his brain operates on a different plane than you or I. I mean, he's a creative guy. He's a sweet guy. I mean, he was a very nice man, and he was really frustrated by all of this, and just really wanted it to go away, because he felt he felt he was treated so unfairly, and he was just being who he is, and
who is that?
People were.
I'm Curious.
You know what? In a lot of ways, I think just an innocent, sort of childlike guy who you know, he would have kids over and do what kids do, climb trees and things like that. That was who he was.
Was he Peter Pan?
He was. I'm sorry.
Was he Peter Pan in real life?
Sometimes I think he was asked that question by Bashir. I think he said he would like to be, or he thought he could be. He wanted to live forever. He felt, and he wanted to be. I think he wanted to live, in that innocent, childlike life that he liked to live in Neverland. Now, if you've ever been to Neverland, I mean, it's like almost going to a theme park. It's everything that kids would love. I mean, there was a zoo, there were amusement park rides, there's all kinds of things there. It was an amazing place, and this was his backyard.
Okay, so I don't. It's hard because he's passed away. I'm not trying to besmirch him, but anything. So, are you saying he was almost like stunted in a way, like he was still childish in a?
Oh gosh, look, he never had a childhood.
Right.
He was raised to be a star, so he never really had the kind of childhood that you or I had. So in a sense, he was trying to relive that, I think. And he was isolated a lot of his life. So even though he was a very popular guy, been around the world, he may have been one of the most famous people at the time he was alive, of anyone on the planet at that time. But in ways, he was, very innocent and isolated, and I think the term childlike is not inappropriate in terms of the way he looked at the world.
You brought up,
and he thought that he believed in the good of people. Like we all used to do when we were kids. That's where he was, I think.
So a little innocent, gullible. You brought up fame, and I believe I've read somewhere that his face, his image was so well known that they actually showed his picture to lost tribes in the Amazon, and he was recognized. I swear I read that because it's such the staggering amount of celebrity or fame that he had is beyond comprehension. I mean, it's something that you've been near him,
right?
But I would argue that you or I could not even just comprehend the intensity of it. And Johnny Depp, very famous too, but not quite Michael Jackson level.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, Michael, a guy like that, you can't even, I mean, it's not like you can run to the grocery store for a gallon of milk, right? If you're Michael Jackson. So, and
how was he with that? Because it would bother me personally. I don't know. He grew up with it, so.
Yeah, I think he was frustrated with that. He at times he wanted to be, I suppose, more of a quote unquote normal person in that regard. One of the reasons I think that the Bashir documentary ever got done was I think he wanted to show the world he wasn't this kind of isolated, strange guy, that he, had this life that he enjoyed on the ranch. He liked to, play games. He liked to, do things that other people like to do. Although he was doing it more as I think from a much more innocent perspective, that he wanted people to see of himself that maybe people didn't see. They saw this megastar that had this image, and he wanted, I think, to say, "Hey, I'm just a normal guy, just like everybody else." He didn't. One way, though, that he didn't do that was with his kids. He was very protective of his kids. He protected their identity, as you probably remember. When sometimes if he'd have his kids out, their faces would be covered, because a guy like that, I mean, his kids are subject potentially to kidnapping and all those things. So he was very protective of his kids. But from for all I could see, he was a great dad. His kids loved him. He got a lot of flack in that documentary that he hung his baby over the balcony in Germany or Paris or wherever it was, and people were calling for child protective services and all this stuff. I'm thinking, you could do a lot worse than to be Michael Jackson's kid. I mean, Michael loved his kids. He played with his kids all the time. He really took great care of them. And so, and in that respect, he was just like you or I. I mean, he was a regular dad, a really good dad.
Back to the fame and Bashir on that. I briefly looked, but I just want to say this is, of course, Martin Bashir, called by many disgraced journalist. I believe he was fired in the past few years.
Correct.
Most recently seen with Alec Baldwin coming out of a restaurant, and everyone thought that was an interesting pairing. But Michael Jackson's level of fame makes me think the only other people on the planet who have something to that degree are the royals. And I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that he did the interview with Martin Bashir because Martin Bashir had done the interview with Princess Di.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was a level of credibility, number one, and a level of because Princess Diana was comparable in stature and fame, I suppose. Right. That may be, that's another analogy right there that I think resonated with Michael. Is that, look, he handled her. He could handle me. Present me in a way that I think is fair. He understood how to deal with people like me because he dealt with Princess Diana. So I see that. That makes sense to me. I've heard that. I never confirmed that with him, but that the analogy makes sense.
Okay, now I've heard that while you did get the documentary removed, that it ultimately led to his trial.
Well, I think that I don't know for sure that it did, but the kid who was the center of the controversy that Bashir created was an accuser in that trial. Mm-hmm. So to me, and I never met him, and I never met his mother. This was one of those things where I think it seemed to me, at least from the footage and everything, that the whole thing was innocent. Bashir twisted it in a way that I think perhaps people around this kid saw an opportunity to take advantage of that. And there's that element, by the way, in a lot of these things. You could say, in the Johnny Depp case, or in, even there's a side to the Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein cases that say, some of these women just came out of the woodwork, and some of them were actually able to prove their cases too. So,
that is difficult. There's another case going on right now, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about it or you've been following it. Marilyn Manson.
Yes. Yeah. No, he's been, I've heard some accusations that in quote unquote real life, he's kind of a nasty guy. I don't know if that's true or not. I have no way of knowing, but again, you have someone that makes an accusation and all of a sudden you're this famous person. You got to deal with it. Mm-hmm. His career, he has a much different situation and career than Michael did. I mean, Michael, was unique among people like him, but Manson has a niche, mm-hmm. and I don't know how that niche is affected by by the situation or not.
Okay,
I haven't been following it that much.
That's an interesting point, because obviously Michael Jackson is not your only celebrity client. I'm not expecting you to list them, but you made the comment just now that you've heard that Marilyn Manson might be a nasty guy, which he may be. Now,
Right.
I'm sure that you might have clients who might be a nasty person, or they might come across as nasty to you.
Right.
Does that make them guilty of the particular charge?
Yeah, no, of course not. No, but the world would like to think that, or the world will draw that conclusion. And particularly if you're inclined to draw that conclusion, you will. Everything, it's confirmation bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
You believe something about someone, and then all of a sudden, everything that you see and hear about them supports that narrative.
True.
So, which, you know, uh, I mean, as a journalist, that must be, to a certain extent frustrating to you because, um, the world of journalism, it's not like it was back when we were younger, where the Walter Cronkites of the world just told the news. Right now, it's there's always a twist to it. There's always people can now tune into stations and podcasts and cable networks that they believe support their views, and we'll just tell them what they want to hear.
What's ironic is I'm not a journalist. I'm just a hack. I'm somebody who talks on YouTube.
Well,
I do try to
but
be responsible.
maybe that's even better. Maybe that means you're a real journalist because you just want to get to the facts. You want to get the information that you think people will find interesting, as opposed to, what's the angle here where I can create controversy and
Right.
and
So thank you. And now to wrap up, what would be the one sentence, paragraph description you would like people to understand about Michael Jackson, to help them know who he is as a person, was as a person, versus the image that is out there?
I would say that I would like people to understand that he was a great artist and performer who really believed in the power of what he did, but also had to eat and sleep and do everything else that the rest of us did, and raise kids, and he did a great job of that too. So I would like people to know that he was like a regular guy who had a gift, and he gave us that gift, and we should be really thankful for that, and remember him in that way.
All right, fair enough. So we should all at least be open-minded enough to lend him a voice and hear what the other side might be.
Absolutely. So, and I hope you've been able to hear a little bit of that today. I hope your listeners are getting a little bit of that today, and I'd be happy to, if you have anything else that you'd like to talk about, I'd be happy to help you with any of that. So I really appreciate the opportunity to tell Michael's story here a little bit.
Well, thank you so much.